CBN. Welcome again to both of you.
Thank you.
How was your holiday?
Well, interspersed with a few bits of work here and there, because of the fact that the deadline we gave, for responses to the guidelines, passed yesterday. So definitely you get calls from people about what's the next step.
So it fell into the
holidays.
Now, I know that we spoke about the guidelines you released on disclosure and transparency last week, as well as on business conduct. And last week we dealt about business conduct, isn't it? I would like us to dwell a bit today on disclosure and transparency. But before we go into that, last Wednesday, for those that watched the show, I did say that the deadline for responses, isn't it, for feedback, was going to end August 13th, which was yesterday. I just want to know what the response has been like, especially perhaps after the program. Let me also know what the feedback is.
Actually, we want to thank you for, giving us the opportunity last week for this. And unlike what we had in the past, definitely you had people making inquiries, about what these guidelines are, but I would still want to tell you that in spite of the noise made on, on radio, on TV last week, relatively, we expected, more responses than we have had so far, and we also want to use this opportunity again now to call on the critical stakeholders, especially the banks and other financial institutions, to actually, come on board. And, well, a few have actually called in to say, oh, we don't have issues, with what you are putting there. It's something that we want to run and roll with. Yes, one or two points here and there have been made, that we need to tweak. Well, the essence of putting out there is to get opinions of the public on what we have put forward. So if you have called in to comment what we have done, expecting that implementation, should be seen through. And, well, one thing about Central Bank is that it is such an organization, it's a regulatory organization that doesn't hesitate, to enforce where it needs to. But in doing this, anyway, we need to point out the fact that, we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Critical to our mandate is maintain or promoting sound financial system. The critical stakeholders in this area are the banks and other financial institutions, and their health also is of concern to us. So whatever we do also, we match this with the interests of the customers, and made the banks also know that the customers are also critical to the success or failure of their businesses. So they need to also take the interests of the customers and other stakeholders into consideration in whatever they do.
Okay. Let me bring in Martin here. For those that perhaps did not see the show last week, for example, I want you to quickly do a recap of just these guidelines before we come back to the guidelines on disclosure and transparency. For those that perhaps don't even understand what Nancy and her people are speaking about this morning, be like, oh, okay, I didn't see the show last week. What are you guys talking about? So just give us a 1-minute recap.
All right, thank you, Nancy. The Central Bank, through the Consumer Protection Department, has prepared 2 draft guidelines which it has exposed to the public. One is on responsible business conduct, and the other is on disclosure and transparency. The one on responsible business conduct aims to govern the conduct of financial institutions as they relate to their customers in their business activities. And in particular, among the things we discussed last week were what the guidelines on responsible business conduct covers, which included offering financial advice to its customers, debt collection, sales promotion, and the rest. We highlighted different aspects of it, which is that, amongst which was that financial institutions must be civil and fair in their treatment of customers. they should employ tactics that, even in debt recovery, they must act in a manner that is not injurious to their customers, but should stick by the laws. So it's more of a balancing act. Like we emphasized last week, we are not asking them to do anything new. We are only asking them to do things by the book. Basically, that is it.
Okay. So, Director, come in right now and speak to us about the disclosure and transparency guidelines, since we tried as much as possible last week to exhaust that on business conduct.
Yeah, just like the guidelines on responsible business conduct, well, these guidelines are applicable to all institutions licensed and regulated by Central Bank of Nigeria. But we went also further in this guideline to actually request banks and other financial institutions to ensure that in relationships with other institutions that may otherwise not be regulated by Central Bank, they ensure that these forms back part of their transaction documents. For transparency and disclosure, like the title connotes, what we are saying is that almost go out there and dance naked with your customers, so that your customers don't know there's nothing that will be hidden from them. So generally, contracts, offer letters, and statement of account notice and all that, should be. We're saying the way we're prescribed how it should be written. We even went as far as giving out instruction about the font. We all hear about the tiny prints. In transaction in banking industry, we do not want to be hearing of tiny prints. We want things to be legible. As big as font 10 in whatever.
So that people can
can see it very, very well. And you also expect that in any transaction with customers, the transaction document should be provided, copies should be provided to the customer in a durable manner that can be referenced, later in future. So for this guideline, we have it broken down into, general provisions, then we also deal with advertisement. The first step of engagement by any service provider is when you put yourself out there that these are my services that I'm providing and this is what I'm putting out there. Especially, we have said in our requirement that do not go out there as a financial institution and only emphasize the good part, the juicy part of your product. Also put out there the risk element.
And those juicy parts comes with cost, though.
They come with cost.
Yes.
So it is.
That is not really advertised.
That's it. So what we want people out there to know that when you want to go for a product, also find out, get professional advice on the risk element of this. And it's also to save the banks later, so that somebody doesn't rush in and is trying to rush out, then the bank will now be saddled with non-performing loans. These are some of the things we want to put in place to avoid, the rising spate of non-performing loans. And more especially when, with the central bank's activities now being tilted toward creation of more credits in the system, especially in the real sectors, and small credit will now be coming up. So we expect that, less enlightened customers will be seeking credits from the bank. So when you are now designing product, look at your customer, know the target, the segment that you want to face. So, and in doing that, you ensure that your contract, your advertisement are actually well targeted. So we also look at pre-contractual disclosures. Having been, I would say, entangled in the web of the fine advertisement, what is next? It's for the customer to approach the bank. And when you approach the bank, what we should have is a pre-contract disclosure. The bank is also expected to disclose everything that the customer will need to know. You are also given the right, at least 2 days or so, you are exposed to the contract, take the contract away, go and study it before you sign. When you sign, even after executing the contract, you are entitled to what we call cooling off period. And this cooling off period allows the customer or even the bank to resile. You are allowed to say, oh, okay, I've looked at this, I know they do again. But remember that they should not be a waste of the time of the bank. So where there has been a drawdown on the facility, the bank is entitled to, to get this money back. So where it is also a deposit, the customer is also entitled to certain things, but subject to the terms already agreed by with the banks. So what we are saying in essence is this. A customer may be under some pressure here and there, he thinks I need a credit. So in order not to run into problem of repayment, so we have given, this guideline now allows the customer to come back and say, I'm not going forward with this. However, you have to pay certain things. You will pay interest on what you have taken. The part that you have drawn down, there must be interest thereon. Apart from that, we also have disclosure about default in this particular guideline. So herein, the customer, what we're just trying to do is to make the customer feel protected, that where I'm entering into any business with the bank, there is protection for me, against any error that I've made. But meanwhile, we should also note that the guideline also advises, that customers should not rush. As you have rights, you also have responsibilities. We have other documents out there specifying the rights and responsibilities of consumers. So this we're trying to, you asked a question about financial literacy last week. This we're trying to educate the customer as they go ahead. Then we are also telling banks to let customers know that there could be room for variation in the interest rate and other charges. However, we also have guide-to-bank charges that's already stipulated, that the number of days, notice you can give a customer before you hike or reduce rates. So where some of these are not complied with, Central Bank has put procedure in place to ensure that customers who are wrongly charged, who are charged higher interest rate without notification to them, they get respite from Central Bank. A new thing that is coming on board is this. Ordinarily, transaction documents can be very huge. What we are prescribing this guideline, there should be a key fact statement. It's like a summary of all the major terms, of the contract. We have annexed a copy, of what we want to see. And the news about that fact statement is the fact that at the tail end of the document itself, we now say that customers are to be made aware, the language is there. For the adoption of banks, they may want to tweak the language, it's just a sample, to let the customer know that where there are wrongs done to you by this financial institution, these are your complaint channels. Seek redress with your bank. Where your bank fails, you now escalate to Central Bank of Nigeria. So these are some of the new things. Like we said last week, we are not doing anything new. We're only trying to make the banks do their business right. So these are some of the things that were put in place.
Okay, let me bring in Martin. What other things do you have to add?
Okay, in addition, we have requirements for financial institutions to offer oral explanations to customers who otherwise do not understand what is in the documents. Furthermore, we consider this segment of people that are disadvantaged, the illiterate and the blind. We expect that financial institutions will go out of their way to explain this to them in a manner that they would understand before these transactions are consummated. In addition, many adverts will always have disclaimers that terms and conditions apply. We are saying that any advert that has such phrase, which conveys similar meanings, they must draw the customer's attention to this, and they must go out of their way to disclose what these terms and conditions are. It cannot just be left hanging. Terms and conditions apply. And then you go into it only to discover that it is something totally, that if you had known what these terms and conditions were, you wouldn't put yourself into it.
What else? Is there any other thing regarding this transparency and disclosure or guidelines? Because just like you said, I think some things that Nigerians may also find very interesting, and perhaps disturbing, is just what you've also said, that you may just go into a transaction with a bank or a financial institution without knowing the full details of what that is about, and at the end of the day, perhaps you yourself and the financial institution would end up in courts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've seen quite a whole lot of them happening. The issue of even Innocent and GT Bank and all of that, and some other cases. How do you think that this can really foster transparency, especially within the financial system? Because it seems that the financial system in the country is not really as transparent as it should be, or Nigerians perceive they are not as transparent as they should be.
Actually, you recall that it's not a Nigerian thing alone. You know, around the world, issue of consumer protection has never been a very popular thing until the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. It was thereafter that the industry started taking or regulators started taking the issue of consumer protection very, very serious. You know, and one of the fulcrum, you know, of consumer protection, you know, as enunciated by, you know, international bodies of which Central Bank of Nigeria is part, you know, is transparency and disclosure. You know, in any field, in any area, even all the other consumer advocacy group, you know, apart from maybe recourse, right of recourse, which is consumer complaint handling and redress, it is transparency and disclosure that is usually people always hammer on. It is expected that in any relationship, the potential sources of conflicts will have to be removed from day one. And that is why in Central Bank today, Central Bank will be moving to other form of supervision of market conduct in Nigeria, you know, very, very soon. You know, and these are, what we require is a lot of disclosure from which you can garner data for policy making. We all know that a veritable means of monetary policy transmission is creation of credit and the rest of them, you know, which is becoming very, very more important in Nigeria today. So, yes, the banks are trying, but what we're saying now is that let all the parties involved know what is expected. You know, so when you go to a bank now, oh, Central Bank has said you must tell me this, you must tell me that. So we're saying that banks should not even wait for that to happen. At the point of engagement, and that is why the guideline on the responsible business conduct requires proper training for marketers. You know, because it's the marketers that go out there to get the customers. So they should understand the products very well, know what the bank is offering, the risk and all that, you know, so that you can tell the customer at the point of engagement that this is what you're supposed to know. You know, that CBN rules on transparency and disclosure says you should have this, you should have that, you should have that. Okay, if CBN says that, where are they? So it's expected that you look at that as a customer, you know, what is missing here. You know, CBN has even gone as far as prescribing, you know, advising banks, you know, in this guideline, even on certain products, you know. For example, in view of the popularity now of digital financial services, we even extend this guideline to all those areas. So it's applicable to money market, mobile money operators, and, you know, the expected payment service bank that will have some,
and all that. Yeah.
fintech and rest of them. So we have specific provision for e-wallet and e-wallet accounts and cards, you know, specifically, just like other things. But we need to put something out there, that these guidelines that we're putting forward are arising from the consumer protection framework that CBN issued some time ago. And the expectation is that these are just the minimum. The banks are expected for their own good to actually go higher than this. You know, you do your research. You know, when you do your research, oh, this is good for me. You know, I can even go further to carve a niche for myself and be ahead of the
pack. We see Nigerian banks doing that. Or CBN is just taking towing the line.
You know, definitely we expect that after the issuance of some of these guidelines and when they kick in, CBN in its monitoring activities will find out what the banks have put in place. We expect board-directed processes and procedure to be put in place by the banks in line with the framework and these guidelines. You know, so what we have just said is this one is there. In your bank, you are supposed to design, you know, consumer protection system.
Yeah.
That's it. So which may, you know, there are banks, certain products are unique to certain banks, and you tailor your consumer protection processes and procedure along those areas, but they must meet the minimum set by Central Bank of Nigeria. So it's expected that where customers are where they are made to understand terms and conditions, not just shouting, terms and conditions apply, shall, without
at the end of any advert, like terms and conditions apply. And I'm
So,
wondering what the terms and conditions are.
What CBN is now saying that for you to put that in your advert, such terms and conditions must actually be existent and must be made the customer must made available for the customer. So, ramping up on your question, it's expected that understanding will reduce, if not eliminate, the risk of non-performing loan. We're asking you to create credits, but you are expected to put certain things in place for the creation of the credit.
Okay. Just tell me if I'm right with what I'm saying, that with these guidelines, banks are also expected to conspicuously display their banking halls and publish on their website and internet banking platforms accurate and up-to-date information on all their products. Yeah, right. This will include prime and maximum lending rate, deposit rate, foreign exchange rate of currencies. On advertisements, the content of all advertisements and promotional materials must be factual and unambiguous, like what we're saying, in clear and simple language. I hope Nigerians are hearing me right now, in clear and simple language. Shall not be offensive, misleading, deceptive, injurious, or exaggerate the benefits of the products or services being advertised.
Yes.
Unsolicited advertisements through emails, text messages, voice calls, and other channels sent by or on behalf of the financial institution shall be at no cost to the consumer and shall contain an opt-out provision for future advertisement. Because we've seen that,
actually, certain marketing strategies are done in a way that a particular product is being presented to you, there will be a tie-in to some other products. Yeah. These are some of the things that we're trying to address there. I'm buying A product, you cannot force a customer to buy a B product. Then another thing is that, for valuation and the rest of them, or provision of insurance services, certain credits require coverage, and maybe valuation of collateral. So we have said now that banks are not supposed to force, service providers on the customer. There could be some interconnectedness, with banks and the rest of it. And it's natural for anybody to say, oh, you may want to consider insurance A, consider valuer B. So it's the customer that will come, and I believe where it's acceptable to both parties, they proceed and consummate the transaction.
Martin, are we going to be seeing an adherence of financial institutions to this guideline or to these guidelines? Are we going to see that?
Yes, I believe.
At least from when the guidelines have been released.
Yes, ultimately when we release it, I expect that. Why so? These guidelines are a win-win for everyone, both the regulators, the financial institutions, and the consumers. This buy-in and this understanding is important because the more the financial institutions buy in and enforce this, the more we will see consumer confidence, in their products and services. And ultimately, it will result in financial inclusion and many other benefits for the economy. On our part in the central bank, we intend to ensure that these robust guidelines are actually enforced and complied with by these financial institutions. We will choose not to just force it down their throat, but we want them to, we want their buy-in especially, and that is why we are exposing all this and waiting for their comments. We want them to own it, because ultimately a satisfied customer will always bring more customers. Okay. And the more they buy into it, it is a win-win again, because this